The autumn sun hung low over Portland's Pearl District, casting amber light across the rain-slicked cobblestone streets. Elijah Chin walked his Belgian Malinois, Atlas, through the converted warehouse district where sleek condos now stood where factories once breathed smoke and steel. The dog moved with military precision beside him, ears alert, body coiled with controlled energy. Elijah had just returned from 6 months in Dubai, overseeing security infrastructure for a multinational firm. Before that, Navy SEAL Team 6. Before that, a childhood in foster care that taught him self-reliance long before the military refined it into something lethal. Now, at 38, he wanted nothing more than these quiet evenings with Atlas, the one constant in a life built on temporary assignments and classified operations. He noticed the black SUV before it noticed him. Years of threat assessment made it automatic, the way it crawled too slowly, windows tinted beyond legal limits, brake lights flashing intermittently like a predator adjusting its approach. The vehicle pulled alongside him. 2 men stepped out. Detective Ryan Voss emerged first, his polo shirt stretched tight over a gym-built frame that had gone soft around the middle. His partner, Detective Marcus Webb, followed, leaner, meaner, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Afternoon," Voss said, his tone carrying that particular blend of false courtesy and underlying threat. "You live around here?" Elijah kept his voice neutral. "I do. Something I can help you with?" Webb circled around, positioning himself behind Elijah. Classic intimidation tactics. "Funny, I know most people in this neighborhood. Don't recognize you. I travel for work. Just got back last week." Elijah reached slowly for his wallet, keeping his movements visible and deliberate. "I'm at the Lovejoy Building, Unit 412. You're welcome to verify." Voss took the offered ID, barely glancing at it before handing it back. "Security consultant, huh? That some kind of fancy term for rent-a-cop?" Atlas shifted slightly, responding to the tension radiating from his handler. The movement was subtle, just a redistribution of weight, ears flicking forward, but Webb's hand dropped to his hip. "That's a big dog," Webb said. "Aggressive breed. You got permits for that thing?" "He's fully trained and licensed. Service animal credentials. All paperwork is current." Voss stepped closer, invading Elijah's space. "See, here's the thing. We got calls about someone matching your description casing properties in the area. Burglary's been going up. Rich neighborhood like this, people get nervous when they see someone who doesn't fit the demographic." There it was. The unspoken accusation hanging in the air like smoggy. Elijah had heard variations of this speech in Kabul, in Mogadishu, in a dozen war zones where he'd been the one walking point, the one clearing rooms, the one pulling triggers to protect men who looked exactly like these 2 detectives. And here, on American soil, in a city that prided itself on progressive values, he was still just a threat to be managed. "My ID shows my address," Elijah said quietly. "I haven't broken any laws. Am I being detained?" Webb laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "You hear that, Ryan? He knows his rights. Probably one of those sovereign citizen types. Always trouble." "I'm asking a simple question," Elijah continued, his voice level despite the anger building in his chest. "Am I free to go?" Voss's jaw tightened. "You got an attitude problem, friend." "I have no problem. I'm walking my dog in my own neighborhood. You've seen my ID. Unless you have probable cause, here's your probable cause," Webb interrupted, taking a step forward. "Your dog just tensed. Looked aggressive. I felt threatened." It was a lie. Atlas hadn't moved, but Elijah knew it didn't matter. He could see the script they were writing in real time, the narrative they'd rehearsed 1,000 times before with 1,000 other men who had the audacity to exist in spaces these detectives considered their territory. "Atlas, heel," Elijah commanded softly. The dog sat immediately, textbook perfect. "I said he looked aggressive," Webb repeated, his hand now resting openly on his service weapon. Everything slowed down. Elijah's training kicked in, threat assessment, exit routes, probability calculations running like code in the back of his mind. 2 armed men, both with their hands near weapons. Atlas in the kill zone. Witnesses. He scanned quickly. An elderly woman across the street, watching from her porch. A jogger with earbuds, oblivious. Not enough. Never enough. "Officers, please," Elijah said, keeping his hands visible, his posture non-threatening. "There's no situation here. My dog is trained. He's not aggressive. I'm complying with everything you've asked." "Shut that thing up or I'll shut it up myself," Webb snapped. Atlas hadn't made a sound, and then it happened. The moment that would fracture everything that came after. Voss stepped forward aggressively, invading the space between Elijah and his dog. Atlas, reading his handler's stress, reading the threat these men represented, did exactly what he'd been trained to do. He stood. Not growling, not snarling. Just stood, positioning himself between Elijah and danger. The gunshot was deafening in the quiet residential street. Atlas dropped instantly, his body crumpling onto the cobblestones. No yelp. No whimper. Just the terrible, final silence of a heartbeat stopped mid-rhythm. Elijah's world collapsed into a single point of focus. He was on the ground before he registered moving, his hands pressing against the wound in Atlas's chest, feeling the hot slick of blood pooling beneath his fingers. No, 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 the word tore from his throat, raw and broken. Atlas, stay with me. Stay with me, boy. The dog's dark eyes found his, that same trusting gaze he'd woken up to every morning for 5 years. The eyes that had watched over him in dusty Afghan villages, that had waited patiently at airport gates, that had been the only family he'd ever really known. Breathe, Atlas. Just breathe. But the light was already fading. Elijah felt arms grabbing him, yanking him backward. Voss's voice, distant and distorted, he went for his weapon. You saw it, Marcus. I saw it, Webb confirmed, his voice steady, practiced. Another voice, sharper, he didn't have a weapon. I saw everything. The elderly woman from across the street, Mrs. Catherine Huang, was marching toward them with her phone raised high. I recorded all of it. That dog never moved aggressive. You murdered it. Voss's expression darkened. Ma'am, you need to step back. This is an active scene. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not deleting this footage. Elijah barely registered the exchange. His entire focus was on Atlas, on the shallow, irregular breaths that were spacing further and further apart. He stroked the dog's head, his vision blurring with tears. He hadn't cried since he was a child in foster care, watching his last placement fall apart. You're okay, boy. You're okay. Atlas's tail twitched once. A final, fading signal, then nothing. The electricity that shot through Elijah's body wasn't voltage, it was rage. Pure, incandescent fury that obliterated every carefully constructed wall he'd built around his emotions. He surged to his feet, Atlas's blood still wet on his hands, and launched himself at Webb. He didn't make it 2 steps before the taser hit him. 50,000 volts turned his muscles into locked steel, his nervous system into a lightning storm of agony. He collapsed, convulsing, his body betraying him exactly when he needed it most. Boots pressed against his spine. Handcuffs bit into his wrists. Voss's voice, smug and satisfied, resisting arrest. Assaulting an officer. Looks like we were right about you after all. The holding cell smelled like industrial cleaner, failing to mask the stench of desperation and vomit. Elijah sat on the metal bench, his dress shirt, the nice one he'd worn to a client meeting that morning, stiff with Atlas's dried blood. His ribs ached where Webb had kicked him. His face throbbed where Voss had helped him to the ground. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just sat there, replaying the moment over and over. The gunshot. Atlas falling. The light leaving his eyes. The door opened. A woman in a sharp charcoal suit entered, her heels clicking with purpose against the concrete floor. I'm Maya Chen. Your sister. Elijah looked up. He hadn't seen Maya in 3 years, not since their mother's funeral, the woman who'd adopted them both out of the same broken system. Maya had gone to Yale Law, clerked for a federal judge, and now ran a civil rights practice that made the Portland PD sweat. They're releasing you, Maya said, her voice tight with controlled fury. No charges filed. Apparently, they've decided you're not a threat after all. Atlas, I know. She crouched down to his level, her expression softening for just a moment. I'm so sorry, Elijah. I know what he meant to you. The words broke something in him. His breath hitched, shoulders shaking with the grief he'd been forcing down for the past 6 hours. Maya pulled him into a hug, ignoring the blood on his clothes, and for a moment, Elijah let himself be human again. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were red but dry. The grief was still there, but it had transformed into something else. Something colder. Something that had kept him alive in places where mercy was a liability. We'll sue them, Maya said. I have Mrs. Huang's footage. We have witnesses. We'll destroy their careers through the legal system. That's how we do this, Elijah. Through the courts. Elijah nodded slowly. But he was already planning something else entirely. The Portland Police Bureau had a reputation. It was an open secret, the kind that journalists occasionally covered and politicians occasionally condemned before moving on to easier targets. Detectives Voss and Webb were part of a particular unit, the one that handled high-crime areas, which was code for neighborhoods where policing looked less like community protection and more like occupation. Elijah spent 3 days researching them. Not their official records, those were sanitized, carefully curated to show nothing more than commendations and routine complaints. No, Elijah went deeper. He called in favors from military contacts, accessed databases that civilians weren't supposed to know existed, and pieced together a pattern that turned his stomach. 14 excessive force complaints against Voss in 7 years. 11 against Webb. Not a single one had resulted in discipline beyond a written warning. 3 lawsuits settled quietly by the city, taxpayer money buying silence and NDAs. And everywhere they went, the same demographic: young men of color, immigrants, anyone who looked like they didn't belong in Portland's rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods. They were predators. And the system protected them. Maya was building a legal case, marshalling evidence for a civil rights lawsuit that would take months, maybe years. She believed in the process, in the power of institutions to correct themselves. Elijah had stopped believing in institutions a long time ago. He'd seen what they looked like from the inside, in Fallujah and Kandahar and a dozen other places where America exported violence while wrapping it in the language of justice. He knew the difference between what systems claimed to do and what they actually did, and he knew one other thing, learned in the crucible of close-quarters combat and black operations that never appeared in official records. Sometimes, the only way to stop a predator was to become something more dangerous. Webb's routine was predictable. Every Thursday night, he drank at the same dive bar in Southeast Portland, a cop bar, technically, but one that welcomed the kind of off-duty officers who liked their whiskey strong and their war stories embellished. He'd stumble out around midnight, drunk enough to slur but sober enough to drive, and take the same route home through Industrial Street, a stretch of warehouses and vacant lots where streetlights were sparse and security cameras non-existent. Elijah waited in the shadows outside the bar, dressed in black, his face obscured by a hood. He'd parked his car 3 blocks away, in a different direction than he'd be heading. His phone was at home, plugged in and periodically sending texts to Maya to establish his presence there. He'd learned patience in sniper hides, lying motionless for 18 hours waiting for a target to appear. 3 hours outside a bar was nothing. Webb emerged at 11:47 p.m., exactly on schedule. He fumbled with his keys, dropped them, cursed loudly enough to echo off the brick buildings. No one came out to check on him. No one cared. Elijah followed at a distance, matching Webb's weaving pace, his footsteps silent against the pavement. When Webb turned onto Industrial Street, walking toward the shortcut through the railroad yard, Elijah closed the gap. Detective Webb. Webb spun around, his hand going automatically to his hip. But he wasn't wearing his service weapon, against policy to carry while drinking. Not that policy meant much to men like him. Webb squinted into the darkness, trying to focus. Do I know you? Elijah stepped into the pool of a streetlight, pushing back his hood just enough for Webb to see his face. Recognition hit like a slap. Webb's eyes widened, then narrowed. You. The dog guy. His name was Atlas. Webb's initial shock morphed into bravado, that particular brand of liquid courage that made drunk men feel invincible. Yeah? Well, that dog was dangerous. Should be thanking me for putting it down before it hurt someone. Elijah's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained calm. You murdered my dog in front of me. No warning. No cause. You just wanted to hurt me. Webb laughed, a harsh sound that carried too much genuine amusement. Hurt you? Brother, you have no idea what hurt is. I've done worse to better men than you, and guess what? Not a damn thing happened to me. You know why? Because the system protects you. Because I am the system. Webb took a stumbling step forward, emboldened by what he perceived as Elijah's restraint. You people never get it. You can file your complaints, get your lawyers, cry to the media, doesn't matter. We run this city. Always have. Always will. You're wrong about that. Am I? Webb spread his arms wide, swaying slightly. Then what are you gonna do? Hit me? Go ahead. Give me a reason to lock you up for real this time. Assault on an officer. That's 3 to 5 years, minimum. Your rich neighborhood won't protect you then. Elijah didn't move. Didn't rise to the bait. He just watched as Webb's confidence grew, fed by alcohol and impunity. That's what I thought, Webb sneered. All bark, no bite. Just like your moo. He never finished the sentence. Elijah moved with a speed that Webb's alcohol-sluggish brain couldn't process. One moment he was standing 5 feet away. The next, his fist connected with Webb's solar plexus, a perfectly placed strike that paralyzed the diaphragm and shut down the ability to scream. Webb collapsed, gasping like a fish on dry land, his hands clutching his stomach. Elijah stood over him, his expression carved from stone. This is for Atlas, he said quietly. Then his boot connected with Webb's ribs, not hard enough to break them, but hard enough to send a message written in pain. Webb tried to curl into a ball, tried to protect himself, but Elijah had spent years learning how to dismantle human bodies efficiently. Another strike to the kidney. A precise kick to the thigh that would leave a deep tissue bruise for weeks. Nothing permanent. Nothing that would require hospitalization. Just pain. Pure educational pain. When Webb finally managed to suck in enough air to whimper, Elijah crouched down beside him. "I want you to understand something," Elijah said, his voice conversational now, almost gentle. "What you're feeling right now. This is nothing. This is me being merciful. Because I could end you, Webb. I have the training and the experience to make you disappear so completely that even your dental records wouldn't help. But I'm not going to do that." Webb's eyes, wide with terror and pain, fixed on Elijah's face. "I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to make you famous. Every person you've hurt, every complaint you've buried, every abuse you've gotten away with, it's all going to come out. And by the time I'm done, you're going to wish I'd just killed you here in this alley." Elijah stood, looking down at the broken man whimpering at his feet. "This is just the beginning." Then he walked away, disappearing into the shadows before Webb could even think about calling for help. By the time Webb managed to call his partner, Elijah was already 3 miles away, sitting in a 24-hour diner with a waitress who would later swear he'd been there since 11 p.m., working on his laptop and ordering coffee every hour like he was pulling an all-nighter. The security footage would back up her story. So would the credit card timestamp. And the text messages he'd been sending Maya throughout the evening, complaining about a proposal he was writing for a potential client in Singapore. Webb's accusation wouldn't matter. Because Elijah had an alibi that not even the Portland PD's most creative report writing could dismantle. The beating shook Voss more than he wanted to admit. Webb had called him from the hospital, voice still raw from the paralyzed diaphragm, describing the attack in detail. It was him. The dog guy. He's special forces or some shit. Moved like nothing I've ever seen. Did anyone see him? Voss asked. No. Dark street. No cameras. But I know it was him. Can you prove it? Silence on the other end of the line. That's what I thought, Voss muttered. So we got nothing. But they did have something, fear. For the first time in their careers, Voss and Webb weren't the predators. They were prey. They tried to reassert control the only way they knew how, through force. They started harassing people they thought might be connected to Elijah. Friends from the veteran community. The Korean grocery store owner who'd testified about seeing Atlas get shot. Even Maya's law office got a surprise visit for routine inquiries. Each time, they followed their script: intimidate, threaten, dare anyone to stand up to them. It had always worked before, but Elijah was documenting everything. Security cameras Maya had installed at her office. Body cameras that veterans in the community had started wearing after Atlas's death. Phones recording every interaction. The harassment wasn't happening in darkness anymore. It was being filmed, catalogued, and stored in secure servers that not even a police raid could access. And then Elijah did something that would prove to be genius. He leaked nothing. Not yet. He wanted them desperate. Wanted them making mistakes. Wanted them so afraid and paranoid that they'd eventually cross the line so egregiously that even the police bureau's protective instincts couldn't save them. Didn't have to wait long. Voss and Webb decided to hit Elijah where they thought he was weakest, his home. If they couldn't prove he'd attacked Webb, they'd find something else. Plant evidence if necessary. They'd done it before. The system would believe them over him. It always did. They showed up at 2 a.m., no warrant, claiming they'd received a tip about weapons violations. Elijah's building had security doors, but they had a cop's key, the kind that opened anything in the city, legal or not. What they didn't know was that Elijah had expected this. Wanted this. He'd turned his apartment into a trap specifically designed for them. The cameras were hidden in smoke detectors, air vents, picture frames, 14 different angles capturing every corner of the space in 4K resolution. The footage uploaded in real time to 3 different cloud services, none of which could be traced back to Elijah. Even if they destroyed every device in the apartment, the evidence would exist forever. Elijah was home when they broke in, sitting on his couch with a book, acting the part of a man startled from his evening reading. He didn't resist when they slammed him against the wall. Didn't fight back when Voss's fist connected with his jaw. Didn't do anything except bleed and endure, his expression carefully calibrated to show fear and confusion. Where is it? Voss demanded, his forearm pressed against Elijah's throat. Where's what? Elijah gasped, playing his role perfectly. Don't play dumb. The evidence. Whatever you collected on us. Hand it over or this gets a lot worse for you. Webb was tearing through drawers, appending furniture, searching for computers or phones or anything that might contain incriminating information. He wouldn't find anything. Elijah had made sure of that. Everything that mattered was in the cloud, or with Maya, or in safe deposit boxes registered under false names. I don't know what you're talking about, Elijah said, his voice weak. Defeated. Voss hit him again. Then again. The beatings were methodical, professional, painful but not disfiguring. the kind that wouldn't show up well in photographs. They'd done this before, knew exactly how far they could go, but this time, every second was being recorded. Every violation. Every abuse of power. Every crime. When they finally left, 40 minutes later, Elijah's apartment looked like a tornado had hit it. His face was a mask of bruises. His ribs screamed with every breath, but he was smiling. He waited until he heard their car pull away, then he stood slowly, wincing at the pain, and walked to his laptop. The footage had uploaded perfectly. He spent the next hour editing it, not to change what happened, but to cut it into a narrative that would be undeniable, irrefutable. Him sitting peacefully. Them breaking in. The violence. The threats. The illegal search. Then he sent it to Maya with a simple message, now. Maya didn't go to the Portland Police Bureau. She'd learned long ago that internal complaints went to die in filing cabinets. Instead, she went to every news outlet in the city simultaneously, hand-delivering thumb drives to investigative journalists who'd been waiting years for evidence this concrete. Why morning, the story was everywhere. Not just local news, national. The footage of Voss and Webb breaking into Elijah's apartment, beating him, threatening him, destroying his property without a warrant, went viral within hours. #JusticeForAtlas trended on Twitter. Cable news played the clip on loop. Legal analysts called it one of the clearest cases of police misconduct they'd ever seen. The Portland PD tried to control the narrative, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The police chief, a reform-minded appointee who'd been trying to clean up the department for years, saw an opportunity. He called a press conference and announced the immediate suspension of Voss and Webb pending a criminal investigation, but that wasn't enough. Not for Elijah, because Maya had more than just the apartment footage. She had Mrs. Huang's video of Atlas being shot. She had testimony from 15 other people Voss and Webb had brutalized over the years, people who'd been too afraid to come forward before but now saw a chance for their voices to be heard. She had internal police reports showing that the department had known about the complaints but buried them. She had a RICO case, yes, actual racketeering charges, alleging that the Portland PD had systematically covered up civil rights violations for years. The feds got involved. The Department of Justice opened an investigation. The Oregon Attorney General announced charges against not just Voss and Webb, but 4 other officers who'd helped cover up their crimes, and 2 supervisors who blocked internal affairs investigations. Elijah watched it all unfold from his apartment, his face still bruised, his ribs still aching. Maya called every few hours with updates, her voice electric with the kind of victory that attorneys dream about. They're offering a plea deal, she told him on day 5. Voss and Webb. Their lawyers know they're dead in the water. They're trying to minimize prison time. What's the offer? Elijah asked. 8 years, eligible for parole in 5. No. Maya sighed. Elijah, I know you want more, but 8 years is actually substantial for cops. Most never see a day in prison. We're not taking a deal. We're going to trial. I want a jury to see everything. Every victim. Every complaint. Every lie. I want them convicted on every single charge. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, okay. We go to trial. The trial took 6 weeks. The prosecution's case was devastating: hours of video evidence, dozens of witnesses, forensic analysis of police reports showing systematic falsification of records. The defense tried to paint Voss and Webb as good cops making tough calls in dangerous situations, but the evidence was too strong. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge, a black woman who'd grown up in the neighborhood Voss and Webb had terrorized, didn't mince words. You 2 wore badges that were supposed to represent protection and justice. Instead, you turned them into weapons of oppression and violence. You betrayed your oaths, you betrayed your community, and you betrayed every good officer who tries to do this job with honor. She sentenced them each to 22 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. When the gavel came down, Elijah didn't feel triumph. He felt tired. Empty. He'd won, but Atlas was still gone. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back the dog who'd been his family. That evening, he drove to the small plot he'd purchased in a pet cemetery on the outskirts of the city. Atlas's headstone was simple, faithful to the end. Elijah sat on the grass beside it, watching the sun set over the mountains. We got them, boy, he said quietly. They're going to rot in prison for what they did to you. To us. To everyone. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth. I know you'd probably tell me to let it go now. Move on. Find peace. He smiled slightly. You always were the better part of me. He stayed until the cemetery closed, talking to a dog who couldn't answer but who he knew, somehow, was still listening. 3 months later, Maya called with news. The Portland Police Bureau was implementing sweeping reforms as part of a consent decree with the Department of Justice. Body cameras would be mandatory and footage would be stored by independent third parties. And civilian oversight board with actual power, not just advisory recommendations, would review all use of force incidents. Officers with histories of complaints would be forced out or retrained. IT wasn't perfect. Systems never were. But it was something. Elijah had been offered a position as a consultant for the reforms. His experience in security operations and his perspective as a victim of police violence made him uniquely qualified. He accepted, not because he'd forgiven what happened, but because Atlas's death deserved to mean something beyond his own revenge. On his first day, he walked through the same streets where Atlas had died. Someone had painted a mural on the side of a building, a Belgian Malinois, noble and alert, with the words "Justice for Atlas" and "They don't all come home." Elijah stood there for a long time, remembering. Then he pulled out his phone and called the animal shelter. "Hi," he said. "I'm looking to adopt. Older dog preferred. One that's had a rough time and needs a second chance." Because that's what Atlas had given him all those years ago. A second chance at being human, and maybe, just maybe, he could do the same for another soul who'd been failed by the world.